Oh, and of course I screwed it up. I screwed up the title slide. Oh, yeah, hold on. We'll just put it in there and then we'll take out the audio. Hold on. Oh, God. All right. You know what? We'll put it in a post. So, welcome everybody. My name is Joe Cohen, and we're happy to have you here at another installment of the Queen's Podcast Lab Learning Series. Let's see here. Sorry about that. And we have a great lineup for you today. Clayton Childress from the University of Toronto, who is author of Between the Covers. It's a book that studies or that follows the life of a piece of fiction and sort of unpackages the writing business that's underlying it. And Dana Weinberg from here at Queen's College, who is an expert on digital publishing, has published both industry and academic studies on the topic, and is a Russian spy thriller novelist. I don't know if that's the, I don't know if that describes you correctly, Dana. We'll get you to introduce yourselves in a moment. And today's session, we are going to talk about the writing business. If you have ever been interested in the field of writing and wanted to know what the professionals do, how the business works, and all those aspects of the writing business that are not immediately apparent to those who are starting out, well, this is the chance to get familiarized with the business, familiarized with the industry, and so we're very grateful to have you here. I just also wanted to introduce my colleague here at the Queen's Podcast Lab. Jason Tugaw is here as well, and Ryan Sperry, and we have some other collaborators. So without any delay, let's get started. Welcome, Dana. Welcome, Clayton. It's great to have you here. Let's get started. Maybe can we start with like a short introduction from each of you, just so the audience knows who you are, where you come from. Clayton, do you want to start? Maybe tell us about your book. Tell us about your research.
Sure. So I'm Clayton Childress. I'm an associate professor at University of Toronto. I study creation, production, and reception of culture, usually all split up. But in this book, I followed a novelist for about a year while she worked on a book, and then worked in the publishing house that was publishing the book through the full publishing season while they were packaging it, putting it together, and fundamentally changing it also. And then I followed that book into 21 book clubs across the United States and studied people as they read the book. So today we'll be talking about obviously authors and their creative processes. So I wasn't just studying this one author, I was also interviewing other authors and creeping around embedding myself in the world of authors. But there's the whole publishing house and reception side too.
Clayton is too modest to brag, but his book was recipient of the culture. Did you get the Culture Book Prize from the American Sociological Association? Which is a very, very big deal. That's something that I think all of us aspire to have happen to us one day, have our works get received with a major national award. So, and it's a great book. So it's a real pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming and joining us today, Clayton.
I have to deflect and say co-winner of that prize.
Oh, okay. Well, fine. Well, you still won. So we'll and then Dana Beth Weinberg, aka D.B. Schuster, is both a sociologist of culture and a thriller fiction novelist. Dana, do you want to tell us about? I mean, you got quite a scope of work, but tell us your work in the field of writing. Tell us your background.
Yeah, so it's been a little bit of a crazy journey. I started studying the publishing industry because I had started off writing and was interested in getting published. And my other work had just come to a natural conclusion. And so that was around 2009 that I really started to look at what was happening in the industry. And I had a front row seat to major changes in this industry where, we saw changes in the ways that books were published, in the models with which publishers worked with authors, and then also just the exploding rise of self-publishing and the potential for democratization of a field that had really been closely controlled by gatekeepers, which is a lot of what I think Clayton's going to be able to speak to in terms of how things get into that, special focused realm when it's the publishers and the agents and all of them deciding what gets published. Indie publishing, which is another name for self-publishing, is where the authors just go and they do it themselves. And the change in technology has made it possible to do that. All of these online platforms, and for the students who are listening now, this goes back a little bit before your time in some ways, but in 2009 and 2010, we started to see the closures of bookstores, especially Borders books. And there's been a big change in the brick and mortar stores. They used to have a lot of books. There used to be a lot more bookstores. There would be more titles circling through, but you really had to have gone through traditional distribution in order to get there. Now you go into a Barnes and Noble and it's coffee shop and toy store, maybe even more than it is bookstore. And the superstores can hold up to 100,000 titles, but places like BNN Online or Amazon Online can hold every title that's out there with no limit. So my dog is barking. I apologize for that. But so it leads to a question of how do we find the books that we're interested in? How do people get discovered? And so that was a lot of the work that I was doing. 2013 to 2015, I was working with Digital Book World and Writer's Digest to understand the self-publishing industry. And in the meantime, I was writing my novels and publishing them myself, which I'm happy to talk about a little bit later. And I got into writing Russian spy novels. I became very fascinated with this and basically did the equivalent of like 2 master's theses on Soviet Russia. And all of a sudden have been able to turn this into a new project where I'm looking at social media influence operations. So I'm still in that field of culture. I'm still looking at media and digitization, but I've moved away from looking so much at the publishing industry. On the other hand, I still have some work that my colleague Adam Kapellner and I are finishing up, where we've been looking at discrimination in the industry. We had a big article in 2018 that came out looking at the pricing for male and female authors, both by the traditional publishers and the self-publishers. And we actually this week just wrapped an experiment that we're doing looking at racism and sexism on the part of consumers. So
can you preview
that's still
that?
To come. What's
is
that?
Is there a price premium charged for male authors or?
There
authors?
wasn't, which so we have this industry that is largely white, that is largely male. And you'll if you read the Vita counts and things like that, where women are often overlooked. Last year in 2020, there was the hashtag Publishing Paid Me that talked about how Black authors receive less, smaller advances and less prestige and less publicity from their publishers. And the only rational argument for this kind of thing would be, well, maybe consumers feel the same way. And so if the publisher is going to invest all this money in the book, maybe they won't recoup it if people won't buy a book from a woman or from a Black author. But we surveyed over 9,000 people and didn't find any evidence that consumers were really all that concerned about these things. So I won't say more about that until that paper comes out, but
Sure.
But basically, we didn't find a rational justification for the discrimination in the industry.
Good. Well, we're starting off with some positive news. All right, so let's get right into it. And for those of you on the Zoom, first of all, for those of you on YouTube Live, if you'd like to ask a question, just put it in the chat box. Here on Zoom, you can ask a question in the chat box, or you can raise the emoji hand and ask a question. But I want to start off by asking you both the same question. When you first got into writing, I guess before you got into it, you had some ideas of how the writing business worked. What surprised you about what you were wrong about, your preconceptions of the writing business? How did they change over the course of researching? What surprised you? Start with Clayton.
Sure. I think trying to go back. It was a long time ago now. I think I overestimated how much money was in it. I dramatically overestimated how glamorous it was. There's not, so it's like the old publishing saying is the best way to make a small fortune in book publishing is to start with a large one, right?
Yeah.
Like there's not, like if publishing, it's like breaking even sometimes is doing really well. Even for authors, breaking even is sometimes doing really well. And the publishing world, the writing world is like, it's mostly what are called like psychic rewards, right? It's feeling good about being a writer and being read to the degree that you can find anybody to read what you're writing, right? It's not a very glamorous world. It's very small. It's very cliquey. It's not at all fair. So I think those were all really surprises to me, just how mundane it is.
It sounds a lot like the academy, just without the steady job and health insurance.
Exactly.
Dana, how about you? What surprised you?
I would have to echo just about everything that Clayton said. Those were my experiences as well. But just to put a little bit finer point on it, I was a member of a writers group back a couple of years ago, and there was a director who was interested in doing a reality TV show on writers and had been talking to us about it. And eventually the whole thing just blew up. It didn't happen, which shouldn't have been a surprise for anyone, because what would they have filmed, right? A bunch of us sitting around in our pajamas at our laptops, typing away. It's like very not glamorous. And, maybe if you did a Secret Life of Walter Mitty kind of thing where you were like, looking at what was going on in our lives and then how it translated onto the page, maybe that would be fun. But, it's not like the day-to-day stuff that you're doing is full of drama and excitement. It's actually very solitary. It's you and your notepad or your computer. And, it's one of the reasons that it's really, really important to find a critique group, just so that you're not so isolated.
Dana, you got attention, I think, for publicizing the fact that there was not a lot of money in publishing, and you got a lot of blowback on that. Do you want to, like, NPR level blowback on that? Would you like to tell that story?
Oh, sure. I mean, so this is when I was working with Writer's Digest and Digital Book World. And we had been surveying authors. It was not a scientific survey, it was a voluntary survey, but it was some of the best information that was available about what was happening in the industry, because nobody knows how many authors are out there. I mean, some of us are just in our, in our bedrooms or whatever, we're writing things and we stick them in our nightstand, but we still call ourselves writers, where then you have other people who are out there trying to get published. And then you have the people who make it to the shelves, and so what was this universe of people who were writing, and how did it play out? And, we know from sociology studies of art worlds that very few people make it in any art world. You're talking about like 1 or 2% of artists who are making a living at it. And as we started to survey the authors who were responding to our survey, we had tens of thousands of surveys over 3 years. And the story was consistently the same, that most authors were not making money. Like, like very little, at least the median was like almost zero. So, very, very few people were making money. And then the people who were making money, there were a small proportion who were actually making like a living wage at it. And, at the time, with the explosion of Amazon and the ability to be out there publishing, a lot of people who had been denied by the gatekeepers or who had these stories burning in them and now wanted to put them out had that available. And it's very exciting to be able to do that. But there was a sense of, being able to win the lottery, of all of this money coming to you. We were all going to publish our stuff and be rich. And that's what people wanted to hear. That's what they paid for conferences to hear. How do I get rich at publishing? How do I become a big name? And for the indie authors, even more so than for the traditionally published authors, the name of the game really was about the money. So I had been involved with the Romance Writers of America, which is a 10,000 person organization that is devoted to helping writers in their profession. And, we would go into these meetings and it was stigmatized to be an indie author because it meant that, you really probably just weren't good enough for the big leagues, was sort of the way that people thought about it. And the first few years that I had been involved with them, that was definitely the story. And then something changed. Some authors showed up and all of a sudden they're making $250,000 or $2 million or $3 million. And that's much more than the $2,500 advance that your best-selling author was getting. And so it changed the dynamics and it changed the stigma. And people who were self-publishing wanted to believe that everybody had that ability. And certainly, I mean, it's a lottery, so we're all buying tickets and there is a chance that you're the one who's going to get your number called. But if you were thinking you're going to quit your day job and go for the gold rush, this was not the moment to do it. And so my sort of cautionary pieces about that, looking at what the odds really were, did not land well for an audience that was either starting to see money for the first time from their work, or was still aspiring to, live those big quit my day job kinds of dreams.
It's funny, it's reminiscent. Earlier this month, one of my podcasts featured Rasmus Koss Hartman from Copenhagen Business School. We talked about entrepreneurship, and he made the point that a lot of the money in entrepreneurship is made selling to the entrepreneurs themselves. It's like monetizing their dream. Clayton, I see you. Does this resonate with what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In terms, I think it happens. It really depends on what type of writing we're talking about, right? But for self-publishing and like book-length works, absolutely. In terms of selling, author services is
like the web.
Selling services to authors is a better way to make money than being an author. If you want like a stable, guaranteed income, it's the way to go. And it's like one of the things that I think has happened too is that with self-publishing or like transitions to Substack and like individual like institutional entrepreneurship, we thought about this as a way of like democratizing income and like democratizing money, but that's just like not the way that cultural markets work. And so as we see across every single creative industry, you end up with a few massive hits, right? A ton of flops. And it was this weird thing. I think many of us are trained to like dislike bureaucracy, dislike the man, but the old publishing model was kind of accidentally redistributive, right? Like you didn't have people making a ton of money because publishers were keeping that money and redistributing it to other people who like didn't win the lottery, right? They got $50,000 advances, but it's the same way the music industry works too, right? Like Rihanna has been ripped off her entire career, but a lot of her money ended up going to people who could have been Rihanna and more, right? Who got advances for their albums, right? So it's I do think we are transitioning to a less equitable system, even moving away from these like giant bureaucracies, which are not great and which have tons of problems.
It's also, the industry is going through yet another set of changes right now. So, the problem when I was writing about this was that there was this explosion of authors who now could be on the market in a way that they couldn't before. But if you looked at our data from, the US Census Bureau and things like that, people weren't spending more on reading materials. There weren't more readers all of a sudden who were getting involved. And in fact, when you think about our lives where we're, glued to our phones and everything else, we're consuming so much digital media that we're not even necessarily reading books the same way that we were before. And so you have this market that's either the same or shrinking, where you have this supply that has just absolutely exploded. And so, if you just do the math, even if everybody was making something, it would be nothing. And then so you do get these blockbusters, you do get these runaway hits, and they take most of the attention. And we all look at them and think maybe that could be me.
Yeah.
And for a while, Facebook, for example, was a really great place for authors to find new audience. You could do a lot of micro-targeting. You could see if there were people who liked like a book that was like yours. You could go after that audience of an author who was in your area. But as more people started to do that, and of course, also to the point about the training, there were very expensive trainings that you could do that they would show you how to do this great micro-targeting on Facebook and get more sales. But as more people did it, the cost per click or the cost per conversion started to increase also. And it's one thing if you're selling like Nike shoes and your profit, you're looking at $100 for your sale, and you're getting like a good amount of profit chunk back from that. But if you're an author and your book is, $4.99 on Amazon, and they're taking their 30% and you're paying on the clicks, and there's going to be a lot of clicks before you get a sale, it's very, very hard to break even. And it's gotten even more so. Amazon has their own advertising as well, and it's gotten more and more expensive for people over time to do well with those kinds of advertising to find market.
We have a comment. Oh, no, go Clayton. No,
I
you.
was just gonna say, it's like, so, to most, it's not like how do you make a living writing. It's how do you make a living that allows time for writing.
Mm.
Right? Because you're very likely not going to make a living from writing. So how do you make a living that allows time for writing? And it's those other sideline activities. So like most people who make their living from writing are teaching, right? Many of the like bylines you're reading are people who make their living like editing, indexing, right, and researching for other writers. Right, it's the actual writing is it's the glamour part of the job. It's what you're doing. It's why you're jobbing all day to do that one glamour thing that you're not getting paid very well for.
So let me talk about the glamour of the writing thing, though, because we've been a little bit down on it. And so, I've been a thriller writer for several years now. I have the wonderful good luck to be part of a writing group, and we meet like once a month to talk about our stuff. So there's a lovely community of writers that's out there, and when you can find the people who you trust to read your stuff, it's very, very exciting. I've had the great good fortune to be able to have my work read by book clubs and be able to talk to them about it, which is really fun because here's a project that you just love that's so close to your heart, and you get the honor of being able to have other people react to it and discuss it. And then as a thriller writer, I went to the Thriller Writers Conference. There's lots of writers conferences and they're very exciting to go to. One time they had an FBI day that I went to, which was just fascinating to go inside the FBI in New York and see how things work and how they think about stuff. I've also gone to a writers police academy where I learned how to shoot a gun and how to write about blood splatters and things like that. And so there's lots of fun, like tangential activities that support the work that we do as writers. The other thing that I'll say is, as we're talking about writing, we seem to be a little bit focused on the fiction part of it, which is where the real creative fun comes in a lot of ways. But there are just as many, if not more, nonfiction writers, even in the self-publishing space. And there, the books serve a different purpose in some ways. It's not to get your story out and have people share it with you the way that it is if you're writing fiction. It can be almost like a calling card. So if you're a yoga teacher and you've written about yoga, or you have a cookbook, or you're a doctor and you're writing about some special treatment that you're doing, it's not that you're expecting to sell so many books, but the books give you a kind of legitimacy that is part of this other business stream that you have. And so that's a whole other thing that comes out of the writing as well. You can be going to speak at places, you can be, convincing audience about the need for your other services because you have this book that's out there. So, if we just focus solely on, did I get to be a USA Today or a New York Times bestselling author? And did I get to make enough money to quit my day job? Then this looks like a very, dull and depressing kind of field. But when you think about it from the sense of the joy of creation, the excitement of sharing that with other people, and even the other activities that can wind out of it, very exciting things happen. And so I have, from the New York Times best-selling author stuff, I am not a successful author at all. But I've been able, through learning how to market my books, to turn that into classes in our master's program, teaching about social media marketing. And through my study of Russia, I was able to pivot to looking at foreign influence operations. And so, there's so many ways that this can feed into other things. And the other part of it is that I started writing at a time when my life was just out of control. I was up for tenure, my kids were little, there were just so many problems going on. And this was my escape. I had control over the universe. I could torture my characters however I liked. Things happened however I wanted them to happen. And really, at the end of the day, if that had been the only thing that came out of it, that I had this outlet that, at night after everybody was in bed, I could just pour my heart out and it made me feel better, that would have been enough.
First of all, that's such a great point. I do want to follow up on that. I do want to get in some interesting comments that were made, though. First, from Anahi Vladrich, sociology. It's great to have you here, Ani. She says the issue that the quit my day job selling point repeats is that the quit my day job selling point repeats the story of the coach making money by training coaches and not getting actual coaches clients. So it's almost like a pyramid scheme, some of this educational stuff. And then Mara Einstein from Media Studies, great to have you here, Mara, says even traditional authors make their money from speaking books, not from speaking gigs, not book sales. Wasn't it? Did anybody read a story where I think it was like the New Yorker, all of the writing staff had to get jobs at Columbia University to get health insurance? It was something like that. It was like a really big magazine. People right at the top of their subfield, and they're still having to scrounge around for health insurance. So it's crazy. Let's go to the next. Oh,
sorry, I just going to toss it. Hi, Dana. So good to see you.
Hi, Mara.
You know, my last book was reviewed in the Times 3 weeks after Trump was elected. So, I mean, this is the other thing that happens even with traditional publishing. So I got so lost in the mix. What also happened was that I was with a sort of medium press, and they didn't realize they were going to get the review in the Times, and they didn't have enough copies of the books the month leading into Christmas. So the sales of my book didn't happen. So these kinds of things happen with quote unquote traditional publishers as well. But what I will also say to you is the ability to be able to then go into speaking gigs. You know, I can get $5,000 for a speaking gig, which is more money than I've made from a lot of my books, you know. Yeah. And I feel like Dana, you know, I've had some really interesting opportunities. Like I did a marketing talk for the Episcopal Church and got to meet the first female bishop of the Episcopal Church. I mean, those kinds of experiences that the writing opens you up to is really exciting.
Thank you for sharing that, Mara.
Let me just say that to have those experiences, if you are an author, you do not need to pay people out of pocket.
Yeah,
you do not need to pay people for author services to have connections with readers, or you can if you want, but you should not do so expecting to earn back on that.
Yeah. It's if you don't know who the mark is, it's you type of thing. So let me ask you this. Or first, one more comment from Ryan. Ryan, Ryan, do you just want to make the point verbally?
Sure. I was just kind of thinking about our work on the podcasters, and like there's so many similarities. You know, it also brings me back to like Becker's art worlds too, right? That Dana was pointing out. All art worlds and all kinds of content creation, they have very few people that actually make it. People do it for a lot of reasons. Very few rise to the top. And for Becker, it was about like these distribution systems that people get into that make it popular. But, you know, it's just kind of very similar across a lot of different art worlds and different fields, and the writing is the same. The only thing I would add to it is that like maybe Amazon, even though we all like to hate Amazon, they're kind of giving some visibility to the people that were just doing it that never got to that visibility point, even if they're not going to be rich, right?
I would argue that it's not the visibility, it's the opportunity to connect directly to your audience. And the problem is that there's so many books out there that it's hard to find them. You know, discoverability is the name of the game in a lot of ways. How do readers who are interested in your stuff find your book when there are millions of other books? And I forget what the number was. I think that at some point there was like 40,000 books coming out a week.
Wow.
And so, you know, when you think about that, it makes it really tricky. I have authors that I love that I follow. And sometimes their new books come out and I don't know about it until months later because, you know, these things are not so in front of us. So it's not that the e-tailers have given us the opportunity to be visible. They've given us the opportunity to be available. And visibility is where we come into this almost money game of like, you know, are you pushing the time in on social media where you've got a following or a platform, you know, if you're an influencer or something, or are you advertising it in some way? And, you know, this is where like the traditional publishers still have a little bit of an advantage because they're putting more money in many cases than the indie authors would on their own. So, you know, it's not clear where the advantages are. And certainly traditional publishing has been hammered in the last few years, where indie publishing has come up as one of the big publishing houses in a way. If you look at it, we went from just recently from 6 to 5, and now I think we're almost at 4. So in terms of the big New York publishing houses. Yeah.
So it's only one step above putting it in the drawer, really, is what you're saying.
With Amazon too. I mean, this is, you can think of Amazon the same way you think of the App Store, right? Which is like the value that Amazon is providing to the system is profiting off of network effects, right? Like they're not investing in any of this. They're extracting a lot of money from this system for having set up the playground that everybody decided to play on. So I do think it does create a pathway from independent authors to readers, but the toll bridge on that pathway is something we should be very careful to promote or feel good about.
So I want to push forward. I have another question to just pivot from the business to the to the tools required to succeed. In your mind, what differentiates a successful from an unsuccessful author? It can be on any criterion that you feel are important, not necessarily money or popularity, but to your mind, what's the key to being a successful author? Let's start with Dana on this one.
Well, so I'm going to pick a first metric of success, which is actually finishing your book. Right? I mean, you meet a lot of people who say, I'm going to write a book, or they've got the great American novel that's hidden in their desk. So, to have any other kind of success, the first thing that you have to do is actually finish the damn manuscript. So I have 3 words in terms of that you need to remember to be successful for that. Butt in chair. You need to sit down and do it. You need to get it done. And, the big thing is to give yourself permission to write crap. Nora Roberts, who's a very, very famous romance author and extremely well published. She has over 200 novels to her credit, and she's been, an ongoing bestseller. She says, I can fix shit. I can't fix a blank page. So the first thing is really just to get it done. In whatever format that looks like, and know that after that is when the work begins. That's when you start the editing process. And so, a lot of writers, once they get over that hurdle of finishing, they vomit onto the page and then they're like, ta-da, I'm done. And they put it up on Amazon because there's absolutely no barrier to doing that. And the stuff is not good because it's not edited. It hasn't been worked for, coherence and quality and, whether it's really pulling in readers or not. So if you want to really be at that next level of sort of professionalism in terms of your writing, not only do you need to finish it, but then you need to understand that the editing process is one that really takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And some people actually enjoy the editing process more than they like the writing process. I've heard writers say, I write just so that I can get to edit, because that's where your story really, starts to shine and take on its luster. And I mean, even in nonfiction writing, those of us who are academics know, I mean, for my own papers, it takes me almost 7 drafts to get to the one that's finally published. And so, this is one of those other parts of the writing life that people don't talk about a lot. But so it's not just that excitement of creation and like, what are my characters going to say and what's going to happen next? There's a whole craft aspect to it that happens once you finally finish that first draft.
Clayton?
Yeah, I would go back to what Dana was saying earlier, and that people write for so many different reasons that the definition of success has to be really personal as well, right? Because you can't have a one-size-fits-all model of success when everybody's doing this for such different reasons. I think the important part is defining what success is for you and sticking to that. Right? Because these are like, even if writing is a career, these are not like straight line careers, right? They zigzag, they go back and forth. You have highs that you think are then, it's like, I made it on Johnny Carson. I've done it, right? And then, you're back working the coffee shop at 3 o'clock in the morning again, right? So I think figuring out what one's personal definition of success is, and then acknowledge, if you make that goal, you have made it, right? And not constantly redefining up what success is for yourself. because I do think that is it's like hedonic treadmill of dissatisfaction, right? No matter what you get, right? It's like almost not enough. I mean, academics do the same thing, right?
Yep.
Like we get tenure and then we like can't turn that hunger off, right? So like the academics version of a midlife crisis is like deciding that the mass public should adore us too, right? Like tenure wasn't enough. I like now want to make it in the trade, right? I think for all writers, for all people in these fields, it's like, why am I doing this? What is it about it that like brings me pleasure or brings me joy or brings it, if I accomplish that thing I have made, right? And like full stop. And it's just all kind of bonuses from that.
You know,
I would even go a little bit further than that, you know, because I'm a mindfulness practitioner myself.
Okay.
And so, you know, sometimes we focus on the goal and we miss the moment that we're in. So your goal might be to finish the manuscript, but if there's no deadline on that, it doesn't matter when it happens. You don't have to say I'm unsuccessful right now because I didn't finish the manuscript yet. You can just enjoy working on the manuscript, right? And so the goal really should be to derive as much, as Clayton said, as much pleasure or joy out of the entire process, wherever you are in the process, as you can, because that's the stuff that you give yourself, and that's the stuff that you have control over. You know, whether your book makes it to a list, whether people review it well, whether anybody ever reads it, you have no control over that. So if you're going to put the hours and hours and hours in that it's going to take you to write something, you should be, you know, pulling all of the rewards out of it that you can along the way.
Mike Mena wrote, gives a comment here. I've assisted a couple authors to promote their books via social media. These were prestigious university presses. I was shocked at how little effort and money they put into marketing. They essentially give 99% of the responsibility to the authors to promote their book. That is certainly my personal experience as an author. Anybody else have any comments on that?
Well, so even when the publishing houses will do things, they're going to work it in the first 6 months. I mean, the first 6 weeks that they have your book. And so after that, if things haven't taken off, there's no more money coming. You know, if some big social story comes up that links with your book, you're not going to see more promotion. So, and also now, you know, when people are writing to agents or to publishing houses, one of the questions that they're asked is, what is your marketing plan? So authors have more and more over the past decade been asked to really get out in front and, you know, in terms of the marketing, which is part of the reason also that a lot of mid-list authors moved over to self-publishing. They figured, if I have to do all of this work anyway, why should I share all of the rewards with the publishers? And so, you know, yeah, that's definitely become an issue for everyone. And then, you know, also this has to do with not just how much advertising there is, but how many copies of your book are going to be out there, whether it's going to be available at a certain time or not, whether it will stay in print or not. And of course, now with the way that we have on-demand printing, a lot of things stay in print for forever because we don't have a backlog of all of these books on the shelves. But yes, I mean, marketing is a big part of it because it's that discoverability issue. It's not enough to just have a book that's published and be able to hold it in your hand, right? The publishers have a business model and they need to make money on the books that they've put the money into. And so they have their amount of time and their budget that they spend for each of the books. And if the thing doesn't perform beyond that, it's over. And the author might not get another contract to write the next book.
So I want to move forward just to make sure that we have time for discussion at the end. Let's step away from promo and business and talk about the creative process itself, the act of putting the words on the text. From what you've gathered, how do people succeed at that aspect of the writing business, the actual writing? Anybody want to take that? Just jump in. Dana, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. This was the big discovery for me in terms of moving from academic writing to fiction writing. You know, in academic writing, we worry about making our arguments and being really clear and whether we're, you know, in the literature and, you know, do you understand what I'm saying? And this is it. In fiction writing, your goal as an author is to manipulate your reader. The thing that you want the most is to have them keep turning the pages, right? So as a fiction writer, it's not about my getting an argument across to you or communicating what I want. It's about my playing on your emotions. right? Can I get you pulled into this story? Can I get you invested in my characters? Can I get you to the end of the book and make you feel something? And even more than that, can I get you to read my next book? And so learning that this is what it's really about is a very interesting kind of thing, because also, again, in this realm of there's so many services out there to teach people how to write. And they'll tell you that there's all these rules, don't jump heads and don't do this and don't do that. It turns out, though, that somebody will come along, like, what's her name? Gillian Flynn, the Gone Girl, right? And she did some things that we'd been told, you're not supposed to do. And then she did it very successfully. It turns out the only rule for fiction writing is what works for your readers. And so the more you're in touch with like who your audience is and how you can get the responses out of them that you want, the more successful you're going to be with your stories.
Clayton?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. I think first, like acknowledging that what you're doing is, even if everybody wants to tell you what you're doing is art, it's a craft, right? And so like all of the like artistic pretensions of this thing that will then later perhaps be interpreted as art are actually not useful to you in your craft. Most of the quote unquote successful writers I've interviewed treat their writing like it's a shitty day job, like full stop. And if you if you are not excited to treat writing like it's a bad day job, you might be in it for different reasons, and that's fine. But like it is like nobody, there are very few people who enjoy the act of writing. Like people, so one of the things I said in my book, which a couple of people have conveyed to me, is like most writers enjoy having written. They don't enjoy the act of writing. They don't enjoy the act of actually writing. That's not fun, right? So like as we are, you kind of you get in a routine, you like develop a hobby out of it, right? So it's the same thing as like starting to exercise is impossible, and if you can keep it up for so it's like writing for an hour or two a day. It's the same as exercise, right? Where it's like almost impossible to start, but after a couple months, and if you don't exercise one day, you feel all achy and weird, right? Because like you've developed like the callus and the hobby of it. So it's like kind of converting yourself into that hobby. So it's like, I think not thinking of writing as an art, it takes so much generational wealth to like have a muse, right? Yeah. And to be like, oh, the muse, like that, it takes generational wealth to believe in a muse, right? A lot of this is just sitting down every day. And then the second thing I would say in terms of successful writers is that getting by on talent is like so hard. It's an incredibly hard road. I believe there are people out there who get by on talent, right? But talent is really fickle, and there's no shortage of talented people out there. So the people who are making a career out of this, it's like, so it's like a hurdle model, right? It's like step one, have some talent. Now there's way too many people with talent, and where are we going to start making our cut points among the people with talent? And among the people with talent, it's like, are you dependable? Are you like not difficult to work with, right? Because I did ethnography in a publishing house, right? Like, are you an easy person to work with? Like, do you take criticism well? Are you like willing to like? Can you hear what people are saying when they're maybe not offering a suggestion and kind of giving you an ultimatum? And can you like deal with that in a reasonable way, right? It's like those types of things. If you assume like, okay, from the starting gate, everybody here will have talent, right? My talent's not going to get me by, right? That's why all these other things come to the fore so much.
I would just argue, I love writing, and I know a lot of writers who do. And I mean, I think it's different if you're, if you're writing every day because this is your day job and you've got to do all 8 hours, at your desk trying to get things out on deadline. That definitely changes the feel of it. But for those of us who have the day jobs and this is the thing that we're doing on the side, it's a very different experience. And so when I finally get to sit down to go back into my world of fiction and plug into it, it's exciting, it's fun, it's pleasurable. And so, that's one of the things that keeps me coming back, especially even through, I wrote these books and then nobody read them or nobody knows that they're out there. What keeps somebody coming back? And for the writers who are really committed through the vagaries of this market, You know, if you're not making a living at it, if you hadn't had a taste of that external success, it's because you really just have it in you that you have to do this thing. And so, you know, at one point I came to the conclusion that I was going to have to see this whole project through, whether or not, you know, anyone other than my 15 fans that I know of for sure were going to read it. And so, you know, that's a big part of this also when you're working, you know, in this area that's, you know, not necessarily at that level of high success and acclaim, you know, which we've just told you it's even smaller than you think, because there are a lot of people who are getting paid for their writing, but who are not making, you know, they'd be better off, as I like to say, they'd be better off working at Starbucks for the number of hours that they're putting in. Yeah. But you know, the excitement of it and the experience of it is what keeps a lot of writers coming back. So.
My experience, if I could just chime in, my experience, I mean, as a nonfiction book author, is that when it's going well, it's a lot like parenting. When it's going well, it's amazing. It feels so good. And when it's going bad, you curse it. And it's like, maybe part of the problem is like, you just get a really big emotional investment in it either way. So like good days are amazing and bad days torture you. Is that sort of what it's like?
I think for me, it's about that experience of being in flow. You know, everything else kind of just falls away and you're like there interacting with your page and things are happening. And that experience of being in flow is such a wonderful one. It's like a high. And the days that we're having trouble where the writing isn't working out, whether it's your fiction writing or your nonfiction, it's because you're having trouble getting back into flow, right? You're fighting with yourself, you're fighting with your words, the ideas aren't coming. And the frustration then is because you're not in that effortless, seamless place where everything is just, you know, pouring out.
Mara made a really good comment that Jason agrees with, and we have some accomplished authors in the audience. Mara, I'd love to just get this on the YouTube live. Can you make the comment verbally?
Oh, that I like writing when I've been struggling, and yeah, you know, I think it's the kind of thing where and when you do a lot of the research and you really get going with it and you know what you want to say, it's exactly what Dana was saying. When you get it into the flow, it's really terrific. But when you're at that point where you're not really sure, and a great example I could give was when I was writing Black Ops Advertising, I thought like big data was going to be key to what was going on in that book. And I went down this huge rabbit hole with it, probably for months. And then I suddenly realized it's like, no, this is part of it, but it's such a small part of it. I don't need to go there. And when I realized that, it was like everything else done. So I think I wrote the book in like less than a year. So, you know, when you can do that and you get into the flow and you realize that there's, you know, look, you'll go down, especially if you're doing nonfiction writing, you'll go down a rabbit hole. And then you'll realize it's not right. And then all of a sudden it's like Eureka, and it's off to the races, which is great.
Jason, did you want to chime in on this? Oh, Jason, you're muted.
Yes, I would love to. Dana, the way that you were describing flow, I think was just incredibly articulate and helpful.
Oh,
and
thank you.
You know, I teach in the Queens College MFA program in creative writing, and my advice to students when they get stuck is always work on the thing that you're able to work on right now that will flow. Don't try to push that thing that's not flowing right now, because if you work on the other part, it may make it so this thing you're stuck on will start to flow once you do something else, right? Kind of like what Mara was just describing. But I also want to say, our students in the MFA program are all trying to figure out how to have writing be part of their lives, or how their lives can be about writing. And so we have a lot of visiting authors, and we are more and more trying to get our visiting authors to talk to our students about how the business of writing is integrated in their life, or what their trajectory through it is, because there are just so many different ones. And I never knew that you were doing this work. I don't know anything. I never knew anything about the sociology of writing. And I don't think any of my colleagues in the MFA program do. And I think it would be amazing to make those connections. So, yeah.
One, that's awesome. Yeah, totally. Well, it's awesome that you're here. For those of you who don't know Jason, Jason is an accomplished author in his own right and a professor of English here in at Queen's College. So, all right. Another parenthetical sort of side note about getting into flow. One of my podcast top rated episodes features me and Clayton, where I went to a sports psychologist to deal with my writer's block. And he prescribed that Mahali Csikszentmihalyi flow book. And the basic thrust of it was like, don't worry about the book. Don't worry about the story. Just sit down and enjoy writing. Enjoy each session. And, and it was actually quite helpful. I'll put it in the show notes. But I want to get in one more question before we open it up. Last question for me. What advice would you offer somebody who hasn't even started writing? They want to get started and they want to get you sort of put the proper foot forward. What advice would you give to aspiring writers who haven't started? Start with Clayton.
I would say it really depends on the type of writing you want to be doing, right? So there's not really, I think for some people, the idea or the label or the identity of being a writer is like that's what they're in the market for, and like that's okay, right? And that's just writing, right? So that's free. All that takes is time, right? And you can do that. I do think I would start for fiction or memoir writing. I would start with journaling, in that, like, I think it can be a really treacherous road to try to work out your problems through writing, right? And I think, if like you want to do memoir writing about like traumatic events in your life or this or that, like purely like that's okay. So this is going to sound very callous and pragmatic. That's not writing you want to give away for free earlier in your career, right? Those are like not stories you want to sell on the cheap because you don't have a lot of those stories. And that's like very pragmatic advice. I understand how callous that is. And you also like if you are like working through your issues while writing, it's very hard to have if you're just writing something that doesn't mean anything to you, it is hard to have everybody say no to you. If you are working on something that's deeply meaningful to you and that like is like your trauma and what you think made you, to have everybody say like, no, we already have 40 of those stories, like this is mediocre, that is like very hard. So I would say don't like by the time you get to writing, if you're writing like that type of memoir or that type of fiction, right, detach from it a little bit, right? And sometimes that takes a lot of personal writing before it becomes public.
That's awesome. Dana, you got a tip?
So for both fiction writers and nonfiction writers, if you're committed to finishing a project, I recommend starting with 10 to 15 minutes a day. And, working, and I'm not the first one to give this advice, Aruba Velvet gives it for PhD dissertation writers. But the nice thing about working at 15 minutes a day is that it's not daunting. You just sit down, you do a sprint, whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. If it's fiction or nonfiction, it doesn't matter. But if you're in it every day, you don't have that problem of restarting and trying to get back into it. It's working in the background in your head as you go. And you'll be amazed at, it's an incremental kind of thing, but you'll be amazed at how much you can finish even just with that. And then if you are in flow and you have more time, sometimes that 15 minutes, because it's not such a barrier to get to do it, becomes the entryway into something that goes even longer. So you can give yourself the permission that way. The other thing I would say is, once you really get into it, it's important to start to understand what your own process is and honor it. So in the fiction community, we talk a lot about pantsers versus plotters. Some people have no idea what they're going to write about, and they just kind of walk into the mist and see what's there, and they get surprised by what shows up on the page. And it's a very, fun and exciting thing. They end up having to do a lot of editing on the back end because it's this messy thing, by the time they're done with it, but that's their process. And then for other people, every scene is plotted out before they even start. They know what's going to happen. And you might be in between those. Even for academic writing, some of us just sit down and start writing to figure out what it is that we want to say, and then we have to hammer it back into shape. And other people start with very extensive outlines about what their arguments are. So it's important to kind of understand what works best for you. And full disclosure, I'll tell you that in my fiction writing, I've come to find, now that I'm onto my 4th or 5th novel, that halfway through, I feel like there's nothing there. The whole thing is falling apart. Why did I even start this? It's terrible. 3/4 of the way through, I think this is the worst thing I've ever written. And I've come to the point where now I realize, as that's starting to happen, I'm like, oh, I must be at the 3/4 point. And that the trick there is to write the list of all of the things that I hate about the novel and treat it like a punch list. Because it turns out that as soon as you can articulate what the problem is, those are things that you can fix. And then, you get to the very end of it. And I think there's a lot of us, even in academic writing, you finish that manuscript, you're like, this is so great. It's wonderful, right? And then for us academic writers, we send it off to our peer review, right? And then there's a whole process that might be rather depressing as that goes through its cycle until the thing finally gets accepted. And, similarly, I think for if you're going into publication, not in the academic realm, as people start to respond to your work, there's a lot of highs and lows in it. And so you need to feel that what you've written is your best effort, but also to understand that that's what you control, is your effort and how you feel about it. You don't have control about the kind of reception that it gets. And so, there is something that's really brave about putting your stuff out there. I mean, even for academic writers, as we go through that peer review process, and all of a sudden the things that we thought were brilliant, somebody else comes back and says, why are you wasting my time with this? And so there's a kind of, ego that you need to develop, where you can keep putting your stuff out and defending it, even as it's going to get, all kinds of reception, whether that's somebody loving it or somebody hating it or telling you that you're a waste of space or whatever it is. You have to be tough enough and in love enough with what you're doing that you keep coming back.
That's awesome. All right, let's open it up. And does anybody have anything to add? I'd also love to hear from Jason and Mara about sort of tips for aspiring people. We got Bernard. Bernard, would you like to have a comment or a question? Oh, you're muted, Bernard.
Hi, I had a few things, and I'll get to them after other people have had a chance to say something. I don't know how long ago, but I mentioned that I had this great statement from Neil Gaiman, which will take me about 1 minute to read. Neil Gaiman, I think a lot of you know him. Sandman is referred to here. Yesterday was a bad writing day. I spent a lot of time staring at a screen, lots of Tumblr replies, lots of Twitter. Lots of being grumpy at myself and convinced I couldn't do it anymore. The script was a mess. I was doomed. This morning, I printed out what I had to fix, picked up a pen, made a few notes, and started typing. It was fun and easy and straightforward. I finished it and sent it to the people who needed to see it, and just got an amazed call from our script editor saying she was laughing while crying and couldn't work out how I'd done everything in one day. And I hadn't done it all in one day. All of the being miserable yesterday was necessary for it to fly today. All of the knowing it was insoluble and awful made the work today relatively easy. I had to get out of my own way and had to read it freshly without being attached to anything. And then I just did the notes. And to make the thing that worked today, a lot of the stuff that didn't work or sort of worked had to be written too. It's always easier to fix stuff that exists. Anyway, yesterday was a bad writing day. Today was a good writing day. I thought it was worth telling people in case there was anyone else out there who was having a bad writing day today. So
that was amazing.
I just think that's one of the greatest things I've read about keeping going.
That was amazing.
He's amazing.
Yeah. By the way, first of all, it's funny that you have that. I just got his comic book because somebody was telling me that this is one of the biggest comic books ever, and I wanted to see what's up in comic books. So
excuse me, graphic novel.
Pardon me. Pardon me.
It is. I think it's one of the great literary works of the last 40 years. And Jason knows I do a lot of stuff on dreams. It's the great creative work on dreaming. I mean, aside from Fellini's 8.5.
For those of you who don't know Bernard, Bernard is studies dreaming. I think that like a kind of a cultural study of dreaming, Bernard.
Yeah, pretty much. But I also train people in keeping dream journals and dream sharing. So I just kind of want to plug and say that for me, a thing that really helps writers get to that flow and keep that flow is being in touch with the material that comes out in dreams. And I know that Jason, and that's how Jason and I met, and I know he feels the same way.
That's awesome. Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I have a writing project that I really am invested in, that's something big, I do a variation on what Dana was describing in terms of process, which is that I'll devote, let's say, 3 days a week, 3 hours a day to it. And, you know, if I can get 5 pages done on each of those days, or even 3 pages, that adds up quickly. But I always start by waking up and writing down any dreams I remembered, and then just kind of like spitting onto the page, you know, just whatever comes out, just to get it so that I'm like in the groove, you know. And then usually that writing turns to questions of like, what am I going to work on today? What do I need to fix? What do I want to work out? You know, and then I have a concrete list, and it becomes a practical thing. I think making writing pragmatic is super important. But there's always this interplay of intuition and intention. There's so much of it you can't control. You don't know what's going to come to you or not. But once it comes to you, then you have to assert some control and do something with intention. But I think the dream part of it kind of helps you tap into the unconscious stuff that has to happen in order to get the writing done.
I would add to that if I'm really struggling, I will also consciously say to myself before I go to sleep, I'm struggling with this. Let me see if I can get some answers about it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But it's actually really surprising that things can sometimes end up being clear. But it's also, I think, you know, what Jason was saying, you know, getting, and I think Clayton said it too, you know, getting up and just journaling for 20 minutes every day, and not about anything in particular, just doing the sort of stream of consciousness writing, just to connect to your head. I mean, I also studied with Neil Postman. He wrote every single one of his books with a pen. You know, so there is something, I don't write my books that way, but there is something to at least printing the work out and editing it by hand. I think that for me, certainly that makes a difference. But I do the journaling by hand, and I think that that's really important with connecting about, you know, where you are and what your thinking is and some of your unconscious thoughts.
I can't write at a computer. It's too distracting. Everything I've ever written has been on pen and then transcribed after. That's amazing. We have a question. It came up in the chat and on YouTube Live. What software do you use for writing? Can you describe the software that you all use and what you like about it? Start off with Dana.
So, I mean, for my nonfiction writing, I'm in Word. Not, you know, but for these big novels with all of my characters and the notes, I am a big fan of Scrivener. And, you know, it makes it really easy to move around your chapters, to put scenes in different places. The stuff that I write the fiction is highly convoluted and complex. You know, I have these spy stories going on with multiple main characters. And so Scrivener for me has been really, really fantastic for the kind of work that I'm doing. And then because I'm indie publishing, they also have a really good you know, way to output, whether you want to go straight from there to EPUB or you want to go through something like Vellum, which lets you make the books look really nice and gives you, you know, another little set of bells and whistles. But you know, for the fiction, that would be my process, would be Scrivener to Vellum. And for the nonfiction, you know, unless if I were writing like a book again, I think I would go back to Scrivener for that, even because it works so well. But for, you know, articles and things, I think Word is, you know, combined with a EndNote kind of software. I use Zotero, but there are other ones also. That would be my recommendation.
Clayton, what's your sense of the tools and
For me, I wrote most of my book in Gmail windows and in at the time I posted it a lot on a 49ers message board. So I would write like paragraphs in like as if I was going to post it on, because it just felt like a place where writing didn't feel high stakes to me. So I like found different platforms where writing felt like a normal thing, not this like high stakes fraught. My entire identity as a scholar, and quite frankly, my ability to pay my rent moving forward is based on this thing. So I just places where writing felt normal and comfortable, and then I did like the writing that made me really sweaty there. I also ended up for some reason, and then I would cut and paste it back into Word. Then I started. There was a period where. Well, first I was like, I have to write for X number, for a certain amount of time a day. And then I was like, the time thing's not working. I find ways to not be writing during this writing time. So then I would do a certain number of words a day. And for whatever reason, counting up to words felt more fraught to me than counting down from words. So I used this shareware program I'll put in the chat called YEdit. And it's just a little text editor where you put in like 500 words, and each word you write counts down. So it's like 499, 498, 497. And for whatever reason, cognitively, that just like felt better to me than counting.
That's
so
good.
Basically, the encouragement here is like, if you want to write, like act like a crazy person. You're in private, it's fine. Just go like whatever works for you, do that thing.
Yeah, that's the honoring, figuring out your process and honoring it. Yeah.
So it's personalized, you're saying. It's like just because it works for an author that you admire doesn't mean it will work for you personally. And there's a process of discovery to find out what conditions you need to start getting words on paper. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, and
it can even be something simple. Like, you know, I find that first thing in the morning, I have a really good run of writing. Afternoons are trash for me when it comes to writing anything other than email. And then, you know, after dinner, I have another place where it's easy again. And so, you know, finding where those entry points are for you, where it's a little bit easier, you might find that, you know, you have certain times of day. You know, some people, it's lunchtime at their day job is a great time, you know, because they need that transition and that like escape right there. And so that noontime is gold for that 15 minutes. And I mean, so it's finding where is the room and the space where you can get into flow most easily.
Bernard.
Hi, me again. So I was just saving up a little so other people could talk. But I know we're drawing to a close. I'd like to say, I think, three things. One is about flow and getting into it. And we haven't explicitly addressed free writing, which almost everybody does in freshman composition classes. But I always tell this to students that I have never hit a bump while I was writing something that couldn't be at least pushed along in 7 minutes with free writing. And the one thing is finding flow, as Dana has said, it's just really important. But the other thing about free writing is that you get to that flow by facing the thing that you're not willing to write about, the thing that's been, you know, hanging on and keeping you from moving forward, because generally it is something that you think is too stupid or too obscene or too simple or too everybody else knows this. And usually that is something you have to get to. And that gets to a second thing that I have a lot of experience of friends getting to this. And I think Jason was sort of talking about something like this. Write in the genre that you're drawn to. You know, you might have gotten to a point where you were like, I don't want to do like a Sandman graphic novel because that's not serious enough. Or, I have to do academic writing. And I just cite the example of a friend of mine who is very, very erudite and, you know, totally knows French literature in and out. And he is making his living writing BDSM pornography that sells on Kindle. And it is good. I mean, it's interesting to read. Little disclosure, I don't care about BDS, but I read him because it's just so good. And he's gotten to his bliss there. And the third thing is, you know, we've been talking about almost like fans as consumers, but the non-quantifiable glamorous thing that happens when you put writing out there is, well, it's like now networking, but we used to call it friendship or community. So the thing about like having people to talk to, like, you know, for the most part, if you're not in this really, really big world out there, like Neil Gaiman is or Stephen King is, A lot of people who really connect with you are going to be writers, and they're going to be thinking about writing, and you can encourage them, or they're going to be more established than you, and you can be encouraged by them. So it's really the great joy of, I always think of it as the alternative academy. We don't have to do academic writing, but we have this intellectual community that's building these days on the internet through doing our writing and paying attention to each other. And that's a very great reward. Thanks.
Yeah, this issue about finding the right genre is a really big one. I had started out romance writing, and it turned out, in academic writing, I don't mind following rules. We have lots of rules for academic writing, and it's very, very structured. But in the romance world, where I was told, there had to be this meet cute, and this thing had to happen, and the characters had to be like this, and it had to have this kind of thing, I completely rebelled. I could not make it work. And I found that as soon as I said, I have a secret, there's a gun, like that was where, it became really exciting. And that thrillers were what was really fun for me. Even with the rules of the thriller genre, like I could deal with that, where I couldn't deal with the other one as easily. And so that is definitely another piece of it. And I know, Joe, I'll put you on the spot here too. Even with the academic writing, there's very different kinds of it. Some is for a very highly scientific audience, and the other stuff is more trade publication.
Mhm.
And some of us really enjoy writing more popular kinds of things than we enjoy, writing these more scientific things. Joe, do you want to talk about your book about that? In that way, yeah.
I mean, I love writing for regular people, and it's just what I want to do. And it's not, I don't know if it's very prestigious or particularly admired in my field to do popular oriented stuff. But that's what I like. And that's the joy of doing it. And I think as long as you can keep your head above water financially and not get fired doing what you like, then I think then you're the winner. You end up being the winner when you get to do things your way and fill your day with things you enjoy. So I strongly believe in that. Now, unfortunately, we got to wrap up. I have a couple announcements. I just got to thank you both before we wrap up to say this was amazing. This was so great. So thank you a million, Clayton and Dana. I love this. I got an announcement before we get going. Couple announcements. First one is, if you enjoyed this talk, please join us on the Queen's Podcast Lab Learning Series. We have events on most Fridays, and next Friday we're going to meet Professor Hannah Wall from UC Berkeley. She's a researcher who studies creativity. And we're going to sit down with her and ask about creativity. What is it? How do you get it going? What is creativity even? If you're interested in joining us, you can always catch us on the Queen's Podcast Lab's YouTube channel. But if you'd like to be here for the Zoom session, sign up for our email list. It's non-commercial. We won't publish anything. We won't sell anything to you or give your email to someone else. So join us. Go to queenspodcastlab.substack.com, where you can write me at Queen's College, joseph.cohen@qc.cuny.edu. In the following week, we're going to meet Steve Von Doren from Von Doren Legal. He's also a podcaster who podcasts on intellectual property. We're going to talk about content creation and the law, copyright, libel. These are all things that you don't think are integral to content creation until you get a lawyer's letter from someone else and you're like, oh, I wish I had known that before. So join us for that. You're not going to want to miss it. And on November 19th, we're going to sit down with Rob Garfield to talk about creating video games. If you like this type of programming, if you just sort of want to join us and be part of the conversation, check out our email list, queenspodcastlab.substack.com. All right. So I'm going to I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to say goodbye to all of our friends who are on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. All right. Just give it a second. All